Situated on the New River between Pearisburg and Narrows in Giles County, Virginia, there was once a small town called Bluff City. Though it was the first county seat, many of the residences there have long since been torn down, and the town has been incorporated into Pearisburg. From the late 1700s until after World War II, life here did not change much. Most people were poor farmers with few modern conveniences. It was not until the post-war economic boom in the 1940s and 50s that life in Bluff City began to change, and life there in 1940 was more similar to life in the late 1700s than it is to today. According to the University of Groningen American History website, U.S. GDP grew from $200 billion in 1940 to $300 billion in 1950 and $500 billion in 1960. We will explore life in 1940s Bluff City through four main areas: food, transportation, jobs, and technology. We will be examining these areas through the photographs and memories of my maternal grandmother's family, the Frasers. Bluff City was first settled by George Paris before Giles County was formed. Paris ran the first ferry across the New River at Bluff City beginning in 1786, and later built the first Giles County courthouse on his property there. Pearisburg was later established on land donated by Paris, and the county seat was moved there. By 1920, the population of Bluff City was 46, while nearby Pearisburg had a population of 537. By 1940, the Thomas family owned George Paris's old house, as well as the row of houses where my great-grandparents raised their family. The Frasers moved into Bluff City in 1936. At that time, they were Sipe, Gertrude, and 5 children: Genevieve, Arnold, Mildred, Buddy, and Billy. Genevieve was the oldest at 13 years old. A 6th child had died in January 1934, only about 6 months old. Gertrude was also pregnant with a 7th child, Lacey Edmond, when they moved into Bluff City.
I used to tell people, I can remember that. I remember when I was born, because we wasn't born in the hospital. I was born. Dr. Newton came up there, and I said I could remember the dogs barking at the doctor when he went off the porch. Of course, that was just fancy, but first memory I can have that I can remember very well was my daddy holding me over the side of the ferry boat there, and he was holding me by under the arms, and my feet was dragging through the river.
Most of the Frasers' food came from Sipe's garden, fruits and berries that they canned all summer, and hogs that Sipe would slaughter every year before Thanksgiving. In this picture we see Sipe with his hogs and Lacey on the left.
Well, he growed what he could right across the road from where we live. He had that plowed up every year, and he had a good garden there. Had plenty. He had potatoes that he kept in the cellar.
Yeah, that's there. Well, your food just about all it come from. Is your garden and go pick berries.
He had potatoes and tomatoes and green beans and.
Daddy was particular about his garden now. Everything had to be a certain way.
Fed the hogs 3 times a day. Sometimes pull plantain or weeds, stuff from that munch on in the summer. Got the pigs in May, and we slaughtered them in November on Thanksgiving Day.
One year is either 16 or 17 times that Daddy shot a hog. Wasn't for here at that chair. In the pen. He shot that thing 16 or 17 times. He'd always use a short. And every time he'd shoot that hog, the old hog go. He shook his head. And whenever we was in the smokehouse cleaning, Daddy'd always get the brains and all out. And that thing's skull, it was that thick. And then when bullets had hit, it bone, it was just shattered. Never did go through.
In 1940, most people living in Bluff City still had to either walk or take horses if they wanted to go anywhere. There were not yet any bridges across the new river in the area, and the passenger train was not of much use to locals. In later years, Sipe began to take a taxi, but he never bought a car. His son Buddy was the first in the family to buy a car around 1950. In this picture, taken around 1940, Cecil French and Sipe Fraser are ferrying 3 vehicles across the new river at Bluff City.
Yeah, we walked to school and walked wherever we had to go. Wasn't no automobiles much back in the 40s.
Back then you went anywhere you walked. We never did have a vehicle.
I would go barefooted all summer, and I was out going all the time. I didn't sit around.
Daddy walked from there where our house was to the Celanese to work.
But he walked across that bridge, 0 weather, wind blowing.
Well, no automobiles then, but there wasn't no automobiles. If you went anywhere, you had to ride a horse.
Depending on the weight, sometimes they'd use 1 horse, sometimes they'd use 2.
During the Second World War, you used to see troop trains come by, soldiers on them. Used to see tanks, artillery pieces.
We never did ride it. The passenger trains don't run through there no more, just the freight trains.
I'd say the first vehicle that I ever rode in was a taxi. It was an old Packard.
We didn't have a car. Frank Ratliff one time had a car, didn't burn up. Ad Parcell didn't have a car. Lisa Neese didn't have a car. But nobody had a car except Hobart Martin.
I can remember one family, and they had a pickup truck. That's the only one that Richard Steele. He had a pickup truck. It's the only one I remember.
Prior to the 1940s, most women stayed at home and did housework, and the children often had to do work too.
But, maybe in the 30s and 40s, the mothers stayed home, raised families. They didn't work. Most of them was just housewives.
Done your laundry with a wringer washer and had a tub to rinse them in, and then you had to put them back through the wringer. Put them on the clothesline to dry. There was no such a thing as a clothes dryer back then.
Like I said, back then we all worked. We didn't play around. We just we'd go get on that there old ferry boat and go all the way up, cleaned it up near Clendon Holler and get old locust wood and cut it the right length. If it's too long, you had to do it again. We knew how long. It was dark. It was time to go to bed then.
Also prior to 1940 in Bluff City, most men were small farmers, and families lived off what they raised themselves.
People just had to farm. I remember my daddy talked about, money was just hard to come by.
I was born in Rich Creek, in the same house where my granddad and grandmother, and my dad was living with them farming at that time. He farmed till the day he died. You raised young, eating's just about for everything, whether it's meat, vegetables, or whatever.
Wage labor became more common later when more industries opened in Bluff City, including a leather tannery and the Celanese industrial plant. The government also provided a lot of opportunity for work with CCC camps, highway construction, and the military.
Tannery was there. Leeson McVitie Tannery.
Leeson McVitie. And see, they had a tannery in Salem also. And them men there, they had good jobs.
They had state highway, and that was jobs then. That was work. They didn't have all that there automation stuff.
My dad and Uncle Gil both worked for the state.
Then Uncle Gil, of course, I just worked there in the summertime. And Uncle Gil and Joe Whitaker was pulling out something out there about Bain somewhere out there. And he was drinking, and they got the tractor stuck up in the mud, and they fired him.
Well, when I went in service in 54. We all went in together. All of us there at Bluff City. Arnold went in, Billy went in, Buddy was medically unfit, and I went in and Jerry went in, so I had 4 out of 5.
As soon as the selling these opened up, they was hiring everybody to put in application, not only in here, but up in West Virginia.
But there was no industry around till the settlings got there.
All the girls worked there.
Me and Loretta and Genevieve and Mildred.
Me and Joe go up there, put applications in. I didn't care nothing about it anyway.
Houses were heated with wood fire, usually from a single cook stove in the kitchen. There was no indoor plumbing and only one telephone in the neighborhood.
Mommy would build a fire of a morning. She'd get up about 5 o'clock and get a fire going in the kitchen. Well, that's where the warmth come up by that chimney, and I'd get up against that chimney, and it's as warm as toast.
Would carry water from the spring, and finally they got water, run a pipe, a galvanized pipe, run it, and got it there to the house.
We never did have inside water. We always had a spigot outside, where neighbors shared.
And they had a little metal wash pan there. That's what you washed your hands in. You washed your hands and you threw the water out the back door.
Yeah, Lord, how times has changed.
There was no plumbing. We had an outside john. Sometimes you had toilet paper, sometimes you had a catalog. That's what you wiped your butt on. They had things too that you called a slop jar at the time. If you couldn't make it up there, if it's snoring or something, you go in this back room and use it and then put the lid on it and then carry it out later.
There was one person around there had a telephone, Nanny and Lace niece. And if we needed a cab to go to Pearisburg or whatever to get groceries, we'd go down there and use their phones. Sometimes they'd charge us a dime, and sometimes nothing. We didn't have a television to probably 57 or 58. My brother Buddy lived in Maryland. He bought us in a TV.
The early generations of Frasers in America had to raise their own food, use wood fires for heat, use outhouses, and travel by foot or horse. None of these things had changed for our family in Bluff City until after the Second World War. My Uncle Lacey reflected upon this when he said the following during our interview.
The Depression was still going on in 36 when I was born. I guess the only thing that eased the Depression was the war.
World War II production did lead to the economic expansion that ended the Great Depression, but Bluff City was not necessarily any more prosperous before the Great Depression occurred. This is where we come back to the idea that the way of life for our line of the Frasers had remained relatively constant since the late 1700s. When other parts of the country were coming out of the Great Depression and returning to previous levels of prosperity, Bluff City was really experiencing many modern conveniences for the first time ever. Another comment Lacey made suggests that this was the case.
Then there was speeding when Eisenhower signed that interstate bill, where they started going into places that never gone before. And you seen how people lived. People couldn't believe it. And I mean, people were really poor.
Not every region of the United States developed at the same rate throughout its history. Rural Appalachia is known to have been one of the poorest regions and one of the slowest to develop. In many places, this is still a problem. New commodities such as cars and televisions appeared in urban areas in the more industrialized Northeast earlier than they came into rural Southwest Virginia in any significant numbers. The greater availability of cars alone really revolutionized life in Bluff City. The Fraser children barely knew their own grandparents just for the simple fact that it was too far to walk to visit them, and they only lived within what is now about a 15 or 20-minute drive by car. The way of life in Giles County today, in 2016, has changed in almost every way from that of 1940. Almost all of what we eat comes from grocery stores. We have running water in our houses and indoor toilets, central heating. Almost everyone has a car or truck and a television, not to mention cell phones and computers. Instead of almost everyone being a farmer, no one in the family is a farmer. It's in this sense that life in 1940s Bluff City was more similar to life in the late 1700s than it is to life today. Though we can easily take modern conveniences for granted, we have not had them very long, and modern American life is really unprecedented in world history. Instead of being responsible for our own food today, most of us eat things from hundreds of miles away, or even from the other side of the world, just as our cars and electronics often come from overseas as world trade becomes more globalized. This is something that has not happened in the hundreds of years of our family's history. It's something to really think about. Thank you for watching.